Hey, this is Ralph, and in this video I want to use some CSS variables and CSS calc functions in order to make our lives a little bit easier when adjusting values, numbers, for a bunch of different items that are all related to one thing. So what does that all mean? Well, in a previous video, I created this unordered list that has these line attachments to it, and I think it came out rather nicely, but the CSS required a number of measurements which were based off of other measurements. For instance, the font size that I'm using for these list items is 1.2 root M's, rems. And because of that, I positioned some things 0.6 rems, or half of that font size. There's another example of 0.6 rems. And even this 1.9 rems, or negative 1.9, that's a derivative of the 1.5 margin on the list items, but also the 0.4 rem border. Now what that means is if I were to change my font size on here, let's say my font size instead of being 1.2 was 1.8 rem. So I'm making one little change, but when I look back at my page, my lines no longer line up the way I would like them to be. I would have to go through and change a few other factors. Same thing if I made this border, let's say 0.9 rems, that could also have an impact somewhere else, which we don't want to have happen. So let me go ahead and Control Z to undo. I'll put that back, put this one back to 1.2 rems. We're kind of back in business. So let's focus our attention on this font size. Basically, whenever I change the font size for my list items, I'm going to want these top positionings to also change. And easy way to do that is with calculation, because it's simply half of the font size. So I'll be using a CSS calc function, but it's also going to be even easier if I use a variable, so that way I can refer to that font size once and then have the calculations refer to the variable. So let's get to work on this. I'm going to head right up to my rule for HTML, where I have, oh, by the way, there's actually an example of Calc in here. I'm using Calc to set the height of my container, so you're going to be seeing that here in just a second. So let me head up here, and I want to set a variable for my list item font size. So the syntax for my variable is going to be hyphen hyphen or dash dash, and I'm going to call it, let's see, because I'm going to have several. I'll do li font size. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and set that for now to 1.2 rems, which is what it is. Now that I have this variable, dash dash li font size, I can move down to the other part of my styling, and instead of putting in font size 1.2 rems, I can put in something like var parentheses dash dash li font size. There we go, VS Code helping me out. So now my font size is going to be that 1.2 rem. I shouldn't notice any change in my page. All right, that looks pretty good. And if I were to change my variable font size from 1.2 to 1.9, then of course I'm going to notice that problem. Cool, so that's a nice way to kind of control that font size up there. Now in addition, I also want to have the font size that's going to be controlling, or at least the sizing that's going to be controlling these top positionings. I have a couple ways I can do this now. Let's try it this way. Instead of typing in 0.6 rems for that top positioning, I'll change this to a calc parentheses, and I'm going to use the var list item font size. That looks good. And then I'm going to do a subtraction, and I want to subtract half. Well, you know what I really should be doing is divide by 2. So I'll be taking my font size, divide by 2, and that's all within a calc function. In fact, I'm going to do the same thing down here. So copy and paste. So I've got a variable within a calculation. Okay, now I think that looks pretty good. So let's see how this is going to work out. And it looks like I'm back in business. Oh, that's pretty nice, which means I could go up to this, and instead of a 1.2 font size, I could make this a 2 rem font size, and everything else is still in proportion. And yeah, so even at 2 rems, that's a nice way to go. So what I've got is a variable called li font size, which is equivalent to 2 rems, or 2 root M's. I've applied that variable to the font size for my list items, and then The positioning of a couple of elements are based on a calculation of the variable of the font size divided by 2, hence half of that font size. Thanks for hanging out with me. Alexa, what is 1525 times 0.5?